Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Eduyot. We are up to Parak Bet Mishna Yud. Today's Mishna Yod should be Leilun Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana Ranbai, Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Chana bat Miriam, Sason ben Rain, Yoshua ben Shifra, Menuchatam began Eden, Amen. And Lavdim ben Chaim Lechaim v'derefua Shelema of Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, v'toch Shah Cholei Yisrael and Dachnama Mera, Binyamin Or Tzion Chai ben Dvorah. The chapter ends with one more teaching by Rabbi Akiva. In this teaching, Rabbi Akiva names 5 instances where the judgment of heaven was or will be imposed over a 12-month period. Af hu haya omer, Rabbi Akiva also used to say, Chamisha dvarim shel 12 chodesh, 5 things that have a duration of 12 months. Mishpat dor hamabul 12 chodesh, the judgment of the generation of the flood, from the beginning of the flood until the land dried up, lasted for 12 months. The flood began on the 17th day of Cheshvan, as it says in Bereshit, chapter 7, verse 11, and the land dried up on the 27th day of Cheshvan of the following year, as it says in Bereshit, chapter 8, verse 14. Therefore, the flood lasted exactly 365 days, the length of a solar year. Mishpat Iyov 12 chodesh, the judgment of Iyov lasted for 12 months. This is learned from a verse in the book of Iyov. Mishpat HaMitzriim 12 chodesh, the judgment of the Egyptians from the beginning of the first plague until the Jews left Egypt, lasted 12 months. The first plague struck the Egyptians sometime during the month of Iyar, which is the second month of the year. The Jews left Egypt the following Nisan, the first month of the year. Therefore, the period of the plagues lasted about 12 months. Mishpat Gog uMagog le'atid lavo 12 chodesh, the judgment of Gog and Magog that will come in the future before the final redemption will last 12 months. At the beginning of the time of Mashiach, Gog, king of Magog, will lead the nations of the world in a war against the Jews in Eretz Israel. By the end of this war, Gog and his armies will be utterly destroyed. Rabbi Akiva teaches that Gog and Magog's destruction will take place over a 12-month period. Mishpat Reshaim beGehenom 12 chodesh, and the judgment of the wicked in Gehenom lasts 12 months. Shenemar, as it is stated in Isaiah, chapter 66, verse 23, Vaya midei chodesh bechodsho, and it will be from a month to its month. All mankind will come to prostrate themselves before me, says Hashem. A sinner is judged from a month to its month, meaning from the month that he dies until the corresponding month in the following year, which is a period of 12 months. The verse then states that after 12 months in Gehenom, they will come to prostrate themselves before Hashem, meaning that they will enter Gan Eden. Based on this Mishnah, it is a widespread custom that someone who recites Kaddish after the death of his father or mother to benefit the departed soul recites it for only 11 months, so as not to give the impression that the parent was a wicked person who spends a full 12 months in Gehenom, as the Rama writes in Yoredeah, chapter 376, Halakha 4. The next Tana disagrees about the length of judgment in Gehenom. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri omer mina Pesach v'ad ha'atzeret. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says the judgment in Gehenom can be as short as the period between Pesach and Shavuot, 49 days. Shneimar umidei Shabbat b'Shabbato, as it's stated further in the same verse. And from a Shabbat to its Shabbat, the term Shabbat is interpreted here as referring to Pesach and Shavuot. By saying from a Shabbat to its Shabbat, the verse implies that the two Shabbats are linked. Therefore, it is reasonable to identify them as Pesach and Shavuot, since they are both called Shabbat in Vayikra chapter 23, verses 15 and 16, and they are linked by Sfirat HaOmer, the mitzvah of counting the days from Pesach to Shavuot. Therefore, from a Shabbat to which Shabbat refers to the length of time between these two festivals, which is 49 days. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri agrees with Rabbi Akiva that some wicked people are judged in Gehenom for as long as 12 months, as indicated by the earlier part of the verse. However, he learns from the next part of the verse that some sinners receive atonement after a shorter sentence of 49 days. And that is the end of chapter 2, Mishnah 10. We continue with chapter 3, Mishnah Aleph. The first 6 Mishnayot of this chapter record disputes between Rabbi Dosa ben Horkenas and the sages about different subjects. The first of these Mishnahs, which also appears in Ohalot chapter 3, Mishnah 1, is mainly about the transmission of Tumah by a human corpse. To understand the Mishnah, it is necessary to know that a corpse can transmit Tumah in any of these 3 ways. 1, Maga, touching. A person or object that touches a corpse becomes Tameh. 2, Masa, carrying. A person who carries or moves a corpse becomes Tameh, even if he does not touch it. For example, it is in a box. And 3, Ohel, literally roof. A person or object that is under the same roof as a corpse, or directly over a corpse, or directly under a corpse becomes tameh. In other words, there are three ways in which a corpse transmits tumah to a person or object by means of ohel. A, the corpse and the person are under the same roof. B, the person is directly over the corpse, forming a roof over it. And C, the corpse is directly over the person. For example, it is hanging, thereby forming a roof over him. There is no need for the person's entire body to be present, either under the roof, over the corpse, or under the corpse. Just a part of his body is enough. So, for example, if someone extends one hand over a corpse, his entire body becomes tameh. The Mishnah also mentions the tumah of a dead animal, a nevelah. A nevelah is the carcass of a kosher animal that died without a proper shchita, or the carcass of a non-kosher animal that died in any manner, which can be transmitted only in the first two ways, touching and carrying, and not in the third way, ohel. Even part of a human corpse or animal carcass transmits tumah, provided that it has a certain minimum volume. If the part is flesh, the minimum is a kazayit, the size of an olive. The Mishnah discusses situations where the minimum amount is divided into two parts, and each part is too small to transmit tumah on its own. The Tanaim disagree as to whether in certain circumstances the two parts can combine to transmit tumah, even though they are physically separate. If any part of a human corpse that is large enough to transmit tumah by means of oil, for example, an olive's volume, was divided into two, so each part is less than the required amount, and someone brought the pieces into a house. Rabbi Dosa ben Orkinas mitael. Rabbi Dosa ben Orkinas rules that any person or object in that house is ta'or, because the pieces are separate and each on its own is too small to transmit tumah. V'chachamim mitami'in. But the sages rule that any person or object in the house is tameh, because the separate pieces do combine with each other. This dispute applies in other situations as well. Ketzad, how so? Meaning, in which other cases besides the one just mentioned do Rabbi Dosa and the sages disagree? Hanogea b'chishne chatzae zetim mina nevela o nos'an. 1. If someone touches two pieces of an animal carcass, each the size of a half olive. 2. Or if he carries them, a kazayit, the olive-sized piece of an animal carcass was divided into two pieces, and someone either touched both pieces or carried both pieces. The same applies where a kazayit of a human corpse was split, and someone either touched both of them or carried both of them. Ubamet, and regarding a human corpse which transmits tumah even through ohel, regarding a nevelah which transmits tumah only through touching or carrying, the dispute between Rabbi Dosa and the sages is relevant only where someone touched or carried the two pieces. However, regarding a human corpse which transmits tumah to ohel as well, the dispute applies not only to touching and carrying but also to ohel. Although the Mishnah already said that these Tanaim disagree with respect to ohel, the following cases are somewhat different. And regarding a human corpse which transmits tumah even to ohel, there are another 4 cases. 3. If someone touches a half olive piece of a human corpse and forms a roof over another half olive piece, for example, he touches one piece with one hand and puts his other hand over the other piece, as explained, tumah can be transmitted to ohel even where one just puts a hand over the corpse. 4. Or he touches a half olive piece while another half olive piece forms a roof over him. For example, he touches one piece with one end and puts his other end under the other piece. 5. Or he forms a roof over 2 half olive sized pieces. For example, he puts one hand over one piece and his other hand over the other piece. 6. Or he forms a roof over 1 half olive piece and another half olive piece forms a roof over him. For example, he puts one hand over one piece and the other hand under the other piece. Rabbi Dosa ben Orkinas mitaer. In all of these 6 cases, Rabbi Dosa ben Orkinas rules that the person remains ta'or because the 2 separate pieces do not combine to form the required amount. But the sages rule that he becomes tameh because the 2 pieces do combine to form the minimum amount. As we will learn, the sages hold that the person becomes tameh only where both pieces transmit tumah to him in the same way. For example, he touches both of them or he carries both of them. But if he would touch one and carry the other, even the sages agree that he remains ta'or. In the first 2 of the Mishnah's 6 cases, he touched both pieces or he carried both pieces. And in the last 2 cases, both pieces transmitted tumah by means of ohel. Since both types of transmission are the same, the sages rule that the person is tameh. According to this, however, the middle two cases, 3 and 4, require explanation, because one piece transmitted tumah through touching, while the other transmitted tumah through oil. Why then do the sages rule that the person is tameh? The Gemara in Chulin, page 125b, citing the opinion of Rabbi Zera, explains that the Mishnah refers here to a special kind of oil transmission called tumah ritzutza, literally cramped tumah. This form of transmission happens when a corpse or part of it is inside a space that is either less than a tefach wide, or less than a tefach high, or less than a tefach deep. For example, it is under a board that is less than a tefach above the ground. Ordinarily, when a corpse is in a room, tumah spreads throughout the space under the roof and it does not rise above the roof. But if a corpse is in a space that measures less than a tefach in any one direction, the tumah does not go to the sides at all. Rather, it rises directly upward through the covering to the sky and descends directly downward into the ground. In this situation, if someone puts his hand directly above or below the corpse, he is considered to have touched the tumah. In these two cases of our Mishnah, cases 3 and 4, 1/2 olive piece was in a cramped space and the person put his hand directly above it or directly below it. At the same time, he physically touched the other half olive piece. Since these are both forms of touching, the sages rule that the pieces combine to make him tameh. The Mishnah cites two cases in which the sages agree that the two pieces do not combine to transmit tumah. However, if one touches a half olive piece of a corpse, and something else forms a roof over him and another half olive piece, for example, he is inside the same house as one of the pieces and he sticks his hand out of the house and touches the other piece. When the Mishnah says something else forms a roof over him and a half olive piece, it refers to an ordinary roof, which covers a space that is more than a tevach in every direction. Therefore, this is a regular example of regular oil. The second transmission, in this case, he touches a half olive piece, is transmission through touching, or ma'ir al kachatzi zayit, or if he forms a roof over a half olive piece, and something else forms a roof over him and another half olive piece. For example, he is inside the same house as one of the pieces and sticks his hand out of the house and places it above the other piece. Here too, the Mishnah says something else forms a roof over him and a half olive-sized piece, which refers to a regular oil transmission. However, the piece outside the house is in a cramped space. For example, beneath a board less than a tefach above the ground. When the person puts one hand directly over that piece, either beneath or above the board, he is considered to be touching it. So in this case too, there are two different types of tumah transmission, touching and regular ohel, tahol. All agree that he is tahol. Since the last two cases involve different forms of tumah transmission, touching and ohel, the sages agree that the two pieces do not combine to make the person tameh. The next Tana, however, holds that the sages do not agree in the last two cases. Amar Rabbi Meir said, Av bazer Rabbi Dosa mitav v'chachamim mitamin. Even here, only Rabbi Dosa rules that the person is ta'ol, while the sages rule that he is tameh. According to Rabbi Meir, the sages hold that even regular oil transmission is considered like touching, because the roof makes the entire area beneath it full of tumah. Anyone who enters that area is considered to be touching the tumah. Even in the last two cases, then, both pieces transmit tumah through touching, and therefore the sages rule that they can combine. Rabbi Meir explains that kol tameh, in all cases, the sages hold that two undersized pieces combine to make someone tameh, chutz min hamaga im hamasa v'hamasa im ha'oel, except where they transmit tumah through touching and carrying, or through carrying and oil. Carrying and touching are certainly two different forms of transmission, and so are carrying and oil. In these two cases, then, the sages agree that the pieces do not combine. However, touching and oil belong to the same category, according to Rabbi Meir's version of the sages' position, and therefore the pieces do combine. The Mishnah concludes with the basic rule of the sages that is true according to both the first Tana and Rabbi Meir. Zaklal, this is the rule according to the sages. Kol shu mishem echad tameh. Anytime two undersized pieces transmit tumah in ways that are from the same category, for example, they both transmit through touching or they both transmit through carrying, they combine to form the required amount and make the person tameh. Mishne shemot ta'ol, but if they transmit tumah in ways that are from two different categories, for example, touching and carrying, they do not combine, and the person remains tahol. The Tana Kam and Rabbi Meir agree that the sages combine two undersized pieces of corpse only if their forms of tumah transmission belong to the same category, and not if their forms of tumah transmission are different. The one disagreement between these two Tanaim is to how to classify ordinary oil. The Tana Kama holds that ordinary oil has its own category, while Rabbi Meir holds that it is a form of touching, and the preceding applies only to ordinary oil, all except the Tumah Ritzutza is a form of touching. And that is in Abotai of today's Mishna Yomi. The Rav does tell us that Halacha does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.